The titanium walls of Gamma 7 gleamed with the sterile shine of imperial efficiency. Nestled at the farthest edge of civilized space, the research station hung like a glittering pendant against the velvet backdrop of stars, a monument to the Empire's reach. Inside, corridors hummed with the invisible vibrations of 17D force fields, the air crisp with recycled oxygen and the subtle scent of sanitizing agents. Kira Nakamura stared at the endless rows of inventory forms on her datapad, each line a mockery of her true talents. A xenolinguist with 3 imperial doctorates and fluency in 27 non-human languages. She now found herself relegated to cargo status, counting protein packets and flavor synthesizers in the station's massive supply depot. "Nakamura!" barked the metallic voice from the overhead speaker. "Report completion percentage on inventory subsection 47J. Kira suppressed a sigh. 83% complete. Logistics control. Estimated completion time, 17 minutes. Insufficient. Accelerate to completion within 12 minutes. The connection clicked off before she could respond. This was life as a human on Gamma 7, an afterthought in the grand imperial bureaucracy, where species with telepathic abilities or photographic memories received the meaningful assignments. Humans were considered primitive, useful only for the most mundane tasks. 3 levels above, Dr. Vexthal, chief xenobiologist of the station, applied his 5th signature of the hour to yet another priority alpha memo. His elongated fingers, each tipped with a bioluminescent pad, moved with practiced precision across the screen. "Clark," he called, not bothering to look up as his junior clerk entered. "Status report on specimen acquisition from the Myrelian Void." Clark, a perfectly nondescript human with a precisely regulation-length haircut, stood at attention. He had perfected the art of bureaucratic monotone. Specimen 7721 Gamma, designation Shadow Moor, is stable in 17-dimensional containment, sir. Routine system diagnostics scheduled for 1400 hours. Dr. Vexthal's mouth ridge flexed into what passed for a smile among his species. "Excellent. The Shadow Moor represents our most significant capture yet. Its ability to phase between dimensional planes could revolutionize Imperial transport technology." In another wing, Security Chief Korax Tell drilled his tactical response team, each member outfitted in the latest quantum reactive armor. "Faster!" he bellowed, his 3 eyes blinking in asynchronous disappointment. "If containment fails, you have precisely 3.7 seconds to deploy countermeasures before dimensional breach becomes irreversible." The squad doubled their pace, weapons humming with barely contained energy. Korextel had built his reputation on perfect security protocols. In 50 years, the Empire had expanded across 17 galaxies, its technological prowess unmatched. But that technology required perfect control, perfect containment, perfect execution. None of them noticed the slight flicker in the force field monitors as the diagnostic cycle began. Kira finally finished her inventory count and received her new quarters assignment, a sterile module adjacent to the Western Research Wing. As she trudged along the corridor, datapad in hand, she felt the slight vibration beneath her feet that indicated the station's massive power systems cycling through their regular maintenance modes. She passed a viewport and paused. Outside, the emptiness of space seemed to warp slightly, as though reality itself were being stretched. An odd sensation crawled across her skin, the feeling of being watched by something vast and incomprehensible. The moment passed, and she continued to her quarters. At precisely 1400 hours, the diagnostic cycle began in Containment Chamber 17D. Engineers monitored readouts as the force field cycled through their test phases, powering down and up in precisely timed sequences. Inside the chamber, the Shadow Moor, a 3-meter-tall being that seemed to constantly shift between colors, like oil on water, appeared dormant. Its form undulated slightly, tendrils of shadow stuff occasionally reaching out before retreating back into its main mass. "Commencing Phase 3 diagnostic," announced the lead engineer. "Temporary reduction in dimensional anchoring fields." The moment the fields wavered, the Shadow Moor's form pulsed with sudden intensity. A tendril shot out, probing the weakened barrier. Before anyone could react, the creature had slipped through a dimensional gap that human eyes couldn't even perceive. Alarms blared throughout the station. Red emergency lights cast everything in a bloody glow. Over the intercom, a calm, automated voice announced, "Containment breach in Sector 17. All personnel evacuate to designated safe zones." This is not a drill. In her new quarters, Kira had just begun unpacking her few personal items when the alarm sounded. She froze, hand hovering over a small hologram of Earth. The evacuation procedures hadn't been in her orientation briefing yet. The door to her quarters slid open automatically. "Proceed to evacuation point Alpha 3, instructed the station's AI. She stepped into the corridor and found it strangely empty. The evacuation routes should have been filled with personnel, but instead, an eerie silence had fallen, broken only by the continuing alarms. Unknown to her, she had been assigned to a wing that had been quickly cleared of essential personnel, leaving only human support staff to fend for themselves. As she rounded a corner, the lights flickered and died. In the momentary darkness, she felt rather than saw something massive move past her, a rush of cold air, a sensation of immense presence, and then nothing. The emergency lights clicked on, bathing the corridor in crimson. Kira stood alone, heart pounding, certain that she had just experienced something impossible. Then she heard it, a sound like no other. Part roar, part song, with harmonics that seemed to resonate through multiple dimensions at once. The sound echoed through the station, and the evacuation alarms suddenly went silent, as though the system itself were pausing to listen. On the command level, chaos reigned despite the perfectly designed emergency protocols. Dr. Vextel paced before a wall of monitors, each showing a different section of the station. "Deploy the quantum disruptors," he ordered, his bioluminescent fingertips flashing with agitation. Security Chief Corextel's tactical team had already engaged the creature in the main atrium of Level 4. The footage showed sleek, armored figures firing precision weapons at a shifting mass of shadow and light. Each blast passed harmlessly through the creature, dispersing into showers of energy that dissipated against the walls. "Impossible," muttered Corextel, watching from the command center. "Those are phase-locked particle beams. Nothing can exist out of phase with them." Dr. Vextel turned to his assistant, Korillinax, a willowy being with sympathetic eyes. "Prepare the evacuation shuttles. Priority personnel first." "But sir," Korillinax protested, "there are still support staff in the adjacent sectors. The human inventory specialist was just assigned quarters near—" "Inconsequential," Vextel cut in. "The Shadow Moor represents 50 million credits of research potential. We cannot risk losing it to save auxiliary personnel." On Level 3, Kira moved cautiously through the abandoned corridors. She had tried accessing emergency information through her datapad, but all systems had been locked to non-essential personnel. She was effectively blind to what was happening. As she passed a research laboratory, she noticed something strange. The floor was marked with scorch patterns, not random damage, but precise, almost glyph-like shapes. She knelt to examine them, her xenolinguist's mind automatically searching for patterns. The lights flickered again, and in that moment, she heard what sounded like a question, a complex, multi-layered vocalization that rose and fell in distinct patterns. Her heart raced. This wasn't random noise. This was communication. In the command center, the situation deteriorated. Engineers had deployed superheated plasma through the environmental systems, attempting to force the creature into a corporeal state. The plasma coiled around the Shadow Moor like luminous serpents, only to be absorbed into its shifting mass. It's adapting to everything we throw at it, reported the lead engineer, voice tight with tension. Psychology department suggests attempting communication, offered Korolanax. Dr. Vextel scoffed. It's a predatory organism. Its only language is consumption. Theoretical division believes it's operating on pure instinct, added Clark, perfectly poised despite the crisis. They recommend simulating its native environment. And how exactly do we simulate a 17-dimensional void in a 3-dimensional station? Snapped Vextol. The mercenary contingent requests permission to deploy fusion grenades, Corextel interjected, his tactical mind already calculating blast radii and structural damage. Denied, shouted Vextol. We need it intact. Meanwhile, Kira had made her way to an observation deck overlooking the main atrium. Below her, the Shadow Moor moved with what she now recognized was purpose, not random destruction. It examined each failed containment measure like a curious scholar, head tilting as it inspected the technology. She activated a nearby console, bypassing the security lockout with a linguistic trick she'd learned in her studies. The station's sensors revealed something the tactical teams had missed. The creature was emitting subsonic vibrations, complex patterns of sound below the threshold of most species' hearing. Kira felt a chill run through her. These weren't random noises. They had structure, repetition, variation, all the hallmarks of language. The creature wasn't attacking. It was trying to communicate, and every weapon fired at it was being interpreted as a hostile response. She needed to get to the command center, to tell them what she'd discovered. But as she turned to leave, the observation deck doors sealed shut. A quarantine protocol had been initiated, trapping her with the perfect view of the unfolding disaster. In a desperate move, Corextel's team deployed a multi-D force field, an experimental technology designed to contain beings across multiple dimensions simultaneously. For a moment, it seemed to work. The Shadow Moor's movement slowed, its form constrained within the shimmering field. Then, with deliberate precision, the creature extended what appeared to be a limb, and simply stepped through the field as though it were no more substantial than morning mist. Impossible! Corextel slammed his fist against the console. That field cost more than this entire station. Dr. Thrunuk from Psychology, a being composed primarily of crystalline structures that refracted light in emotional patterns, finally spoke up from the corner of the command center. Perhaps, they suggested, their body glowing with cautious yellow light. We are fundamentally misunderstanding the nature of this entity. Its behavior suggests sentience, not predatory instinct. Dr. Vextel turned, his mouth ridge twisted in a sneer. And what would you suggest, Doctor? That we ask it politely to return to containment? Actually, Dr. Thrunuk continued, undeterred. Yes, communication might succeed where force has failed. In the observation deck, Kira had made a discovery. By adjusting the audio sensors, she had isolated the creature's subsonic emissions and brought them into audible range. What she heard confirmed her suspicions. Layers of harmonic overtones, structured phrases, distinctive rhythms. This was language, complex and sophisticated. She felt a familiar excitement, the thrill of encountering a new form of communication. But beneath that professional curiosity lay fear. The creature had demolished every defense the station had deployed. If it decided she was a threat. The station shuddered as another containment attempt failed. Through the observation window, Kira saw the Shadow Moor pause in the atrium, its form shifting more rapidly now, colors cycling between deep crimson and obsidian. It reared up, stretching to nearly twice its height, and emitted a roar that seemed to vibrate through multiple realities at once. In that moment, Kira made her decision. If no one else would try to communicate, she would. It might mean her death, but the alternative was watching the station be torn apart, with her inside it. She forced open an emergency maintenance hatch and began making her way toward the atrium. The command center had descended into recriminations and blame shifting. The engineering department accused security of aggravating the creature. The research division blamed containment for inadequate protocols. Everyone found someone else responsible for the disaster. "Evacuation of priority personnel is complete," reported Clark, his tone still perfectly measured. "Remaining station complement, 42 support staff, primarily human. Prepare to jettison affected sections," ordered Dr. Vextel. "We can rebuild the station. The research data is irreplaceable." Korillanax's eyes widened in shock. "Sir, there are still people in those sections." "Collateral damage," Vextel replied dismissively. "The Empire will compensate their families." Korextel, despite his tactical ruthlessness, looked uncomfortable. "Sir, Imperial protocol requires attempt at personnel recovery before structural sacrifice." "Override Protocol 17 Alpha 9, Vextel snapped. "Extreme containment risk justifies exceptional measures." In the central atrium, the Shadow Moor continued its methodical inspection of the station's technology, occasionally emitting complex vocalizations that no one was listening to. No one except Kira, who had emerged from a maintenance tunnel onto a balcony overlooking the vast space. The creature was directly below her, its form rippling with colors that seemed to bend reality around them. Up close, she could see that what had appeared as random shifts were actually patterns, information encoded in light and shadow, changing in response to its environment. Reality itself seemed to warp around its form, space and time bending slightly in its presence. This was no simple animal. This was a being that existed partly in dimensions humans couldn't even perceive. Kira took a deep breath. Everything in her screamed to run, to hide. But her xenolinguist's training told her that this moment, this opportunity to bridge an impossible gap of understanding, was why she had spent her life studying communication. The Shadow Moor paused mid-roar, as though sensing her presence. Its form shifted, orienting toward her. The security cameras captured the moment. A small human figure, standing before a creature of incomprehensible power and alien nature. In the command center, Dr. Vextel watched in horror. "Who is that? Get them out of there immediately!" "It's the inventory specialist," Clark identified. "Kira Nakamura." "What is she doing?" demanded Korextel, leaning forward in disbelief. On the screen, they watched as Kira closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to vocalize. She channeled her human voice through alien phonemes, layering whisper, song, and harmonic resonance. She had studied the recordings of the creature's sounds, identified patterns, and now attempted to reproduce them, modulating her voice to create overtones and undertones that mimicked the complex, multi-dimensional speech of the Shadow Moor. For 14 seconds, the creature stood perfectly still, its roar fracturing into silence. The entire station seemed to hold its breath. Then, drawing upon everything she had learned, Kira uttered a phrase in what she believed was the creature's own syntax, a complex sound that human language might approximate as lost podmate and seeking comfort. The Shadow Moor cocked its massive head, its colors shifting from aggressive crimson to a curious, swirling blue. It made a sound, softer now, almost tentative. Kira responded, adding layers of sound that expressed understanding, safety, help. The tension in the atrium broke as the creature knelt, its form condensing to a smaller size, emitting a sound that needed no translation across species boundaries: relief. In the command center, stunned silence reigned. The screens showed what seemed impossible. The apex predator they had been fighting was now communicating peacefully with a human inventory clerk. "Record everything," whispered Dr. Vextel, his academic instincts overriding his panic. "Every frequency, every modulation, over the next hours, through patient exchange." Kira learned the truth. The creature, whose name was a complex harmonic that roughly translated to Keith Mortal in human speech, was not an adult predator, but a juvenile, separated from its family during a dimensional migration. Its attacks had been attempts to locate its pod. Its destruction, merely the side effects of a frightened child trying to find its way home. 3 days later, the station had transformed. Research teams worked around the clock to establish better communication protocols. The Shadow Moor, now known by its proper name, remained in the atrium, no longer contained by force fields, but staying voluntarily, as Kira and a hastily assembled xenolinguistic team worked to help it. Dr. Vextel had quickly adapted to the new circumstances, already drafting papers claiming the planned communication experiment as his brainchild. The 3 weeks of chaos and destruction were being systematically erased from official reports, replaced with a narrative of imperial scientific brilliance. The communication breakthrough with the interdimensional entity represents a significant advancement in our understanding of extra-dimensional beings, he dictated to Clark, who recorded every word with perfect efficiency. In a quiet corner of the research lab, Dr. Thrunuk sat with Korillanax, watching Kira and Keith Mortul communicate through an increasingly sophisticated translation system. "She did what our entire station could not," observed Thrunuk, their crystalline body glowing with admiration. Korillanax nodded. "She listened. When we saw a monster, she saw a child calling for help." "The Empire won't acknowledge that a human made this breakthrough," Thrunuk said softly. "It doesn't fit their narrative of superior species." "No," agreed Korillanax, "but we will remember." A week later, Imperial diplomats arrived on Gamma 7. Through the translation matrix Kira had helped develop, they established contact with Keith Mortal's species across dimensional boundaries. Arrangements were made for a reunion with the creature's pod. Dr. Vextel stood before the assembled Imperial representatives, basking in their approval. "Through careful scientific protocol and planned communication strategies, we have transformed a potential threat into a diplomatic opportunity," he announced. His report made no mention of Kira's role. Later that evening, Kira was summoned to Vextel's office. The xenobiologist regarded her with what might have been respect or calculation. Specialist Nakamura," he began. "Your linguistic abilities have proven unexpectedly useful. I am prepared to offer you a position on the actual research team." Kira kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, Dr. Vextel." "Of course," he continued. "The official report has already been filed with Imperial Command. For consistency, your role would need to be minimized in any future discussions. A simple matter of maintaining proper scientific narrative. In other words, she could have a real position if she agreed to let Vextel take credit for her breakthrough, if she agreed to erase the fact that a human had succeeded where the superior species had failed." "I understand," she said carefully, "and I appreciate the opportunity." The day of Keith Mortal's departure arrived. A shimmering dimensional portal had been established in the main hangar bay. Through it, Kira could glimpse shapes similar to the young creature, its family, waiting just beyond the veil of this reality. The station personnel gathered to witness the historic moment. Dr. Vextel stood at the forefront, ready to make another speech about Imperial scientific achievement. Kira stood to the side, officially just another staff member. But Keith Mortal moved away from the Imperial delegation and approached her. The massive being lowered itself to her eye level, its colors shifting to a warm, golden hue that the translation matrix identified as gratitude and friendship. It emitted a complex series of harmonics that the official translators scrambled to interpret. But Kira understood without the technology. In the language she had helped decode, Keith Mortal was saying goodbye to the one being on the station who had truly heard it. She responded in kind, her human voice stretching to produce the alien sounds. Around them, the Imperial officials shifted uncomfortably at this display of human capability that contradicted their hierarchical worldview. Keith Mortal turned and moved toward the dimensional portal. At the threshold, It paused and emitted one final communication, a series of harmonics that the translation matrix rendered as, "Those who listen find truth beyond force." Then the creature stepped through, reality rippling around its passing, and was gone. In the silence that followed, Korillanax approached Kira. "What will you do now?" they asked quietly. Kira watched the dimensional portal fade. "I'll keep listening," she said. "Someone has to." She thought about the Empire's vast technological might, its 17-dimensional force fields, its quantum disruptors, its multiversal engines. And she thought about how all of it had failed before the simple power of listening, of empathy, of recognizing sentience across the boundaries of form and dimension. Dr. Vexthal was already discussing weaponizing the communication techniques, turning understanding into another tool of imperial control. The bureaucracy would grind on, forms would be stamped, reports would be filed, and the truth would be systematically erased. But not completely. Kira had made copies of her original research. Someday, the Empire would need to recognize that true power lay not in domination, but in connection. That sometimes, the most important voice was the one they had dismissed as inconsequential. As the crowd dispersed and the station returned to its normal operations, Kira felt a strange peace. She had bridged a gap between worlds, between dimensions, between understandings, and in doing so, she had discovered something about herself, a strength beyond technology, beyond imperial hierarchies. The next day, she reported to her new position in the Xenolinguistics lab, no longer counting protein packets, but decoding the languages of the universe. Her official title remained Assistant Specialist, well below her actual qualifications. Her breakthrough would be credited to others in the imperial records. But as she began work on analyzing new communication patterns from distant sectors, she knew the truth. When faced with the incomprehensible, when all the Empire's might had failed, it was a human who had whispered a name and stopped a roar. And someday, the universe would hear her whisper too. The titanium walls of Gamma 7 continued to gleam with imperial efficiency. The corridors still hummed with the vibrations of force fields. Bureaucrats still stamped forms and filed reports. But something had changed. Something fundamental. In a station built on the premise of control and containment, someone had discovered the power of connection. And that discovery, like a whispered name, would echo across dimensions. The end.